Here we are again at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. And as you know, this is our 66th convening. As we wrap up our 12 days, we would be remiss if we did not get this grand opportunity to actually have an exclusive interview with such a brilliant woman. And I'm going to bring up Rosemary Campbell Stevens, and she's going to talk to us on the global majority's impact in the climate change era. It is going to be a treat for you and for us. I'm your host, Yvonne Gamble, and I am the CEO of San Pete Financial Group. And as you know, we are a venture capital firm. I am also the co-founder of Women Leading Change Now, which is a political advocacy group, and I am Lifesavers Ambassadors International USA Country Director. So with that, I'm going to bring up my guest, Rosemary Campbell Stevens, and she's going to tell you about what she has been doing with her illustrious career and what she's going to be doing in the future with her career. So let me bring her up to the podium, and she's going to speak. She's speaking to us today. Where in the world is Rosemary today?
Well, Yvonne, it is my pleasure to be joining you from Jamaica, from the lovely island of Jamaica in the Caribbean. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, we're so happy to have you here and so glad that you gave us a time just to interview and to talk to you and just to get to know a little bit more about you. What I'd like to do is, if you could, take a few moments and just tell us, who is Rosemary and what has she been doing all these years?
Well, thank you. Well, Rosemary is a daughter of Jamaican parents. I was born in England, and my parents moved from Jamaica to England in the 1950s. They're described in recent history as the Windrush generation because there was a ship called the Windrush that took a lot of Caribbean people over to the UK. And I was born there. I'm one of four children that my parents had, two of whom were born here in Jamaica, and two were born in the UK. And I grew up and decided that I wanted to be a teacher. I was influenced by something that I saw on the TV as a young woman, as a young teenager, actually. And it was students in Soweto, South Africa, who were demonstrating against being taught in Afrikaans in South Africa and not in their home language, and were demonstrating about the Bantu education system that they were a part of. And I remember listening to a young man who would have probably been about 15, the same age that I was in 1976, and thinking to myself, I want to be an educator who is good enough to stand alongside students like this. So for the last 40 years, I have been an educator, I've been a teacher. I started out as a teacher of English, and I have done a lot of things within education, including being a very reluctant school inspector, but also working at government level in terms of advising government on all things to do with equity and social justice within education. But the last 20 years in the UK, before I left to come and live here in Jamaica with my husband, and we're both retired, my focus has been on educational leadership. And a big conversation within the UK, and still is today, is the extent to which educational leadership in the UK, and particularly in places like London, actually reflect the communities that they serve. And so there's a big debate about underrepresentation and not having people who look like the communities that they serve lead education systems. And so the big piece of work that I did before I left the UK, and what my recent book is about, is looking at how we can get more Black, Asian, people of color into leadership positions in London schools, but not just getting them into leadership positions, but actually having that lens, having that cultural lens that they bring to the way that leadership is enacted. And so, hence the book, Educational Leadership and the Global Majority, Decolonizing Narratives.
That is brilliant. That is brilliant. That's, that's what it's all about, and that's what we want to hear. When someone has been in an industry for that long, especially in the industry of education, because as we know, that's the one thing: the knowing, the wisdom, the knowledge, and knowing how to implement that knowledge, in all aspects of society is so important. And
Yeah,
you are correct. When you look at someone and you see a teacher and that person looks like you, then you feel like I can be like her, or I can be like him. And
absolutely,
you listen more because it's almost like looking at a parent.
absolutely.
There. And so it's there's no resistance
Mm.
whatsoever, with that. Well, what I'd like to know about, I also understand that you're taking on a role out here. Now that you're coming away from your semi-retired, away from the education system, you're taking on the life of building a brand of consultancy. So, what might someone come to you to be consulted on?
They might definitely come to me to think through how they can look at leadership in whatever sphere. Although my expertise and my background is in education, the work that I'm doing on leadership is looking at how we can center a global majority, global conceptualization of leadership. So, looking at leadership through a lens that is not white, centering the global majority who make up 85% of the population of planet Earth, and actually looking at different global paradigms in terms of leadership. If I can give you an example of a piece of work that I was doing recently, and where they were wanting to look at how they could actually manage the COVID situation. And we drew a lot of inspiration from looking at women leaders across the world and looking at women leaders who were managing the COVID situation differently. And one of the examples that we landed on was Jacinda Ardern. So Jacinda Ardern, New Zealand Prime Minister, and when you look at her approach to management of COVID, one of the things that she has centered is the fact that she needs to return to the Indigenous population, the Indigenous knowledge, the Indigenous cultures that make up New Zealand. She's a minority as a white woman there and a leader, but she recognizes that within that soil and within those people, within those indigenous people, there are ways of being and ways of seeing that add something to how you navigate something like a global pandemic. And so she's a brilliant example of the kind of work that I'm getting people to do, to think about leadership through a different lens, not the Harvard-esque white male perspective of what leadership is, not the linear top-down leadership, but what does a orientation towards we as opposed to I bring you? And when we look at global indigenous wisdoms, which are often seen as something that are historical and that don't have a place in our current technological thinking, then we are actually robbing ourselves of real knowledge that could actually enable us to weather current storms. So it's looking
Well,
at
that's
different
interesting.
paradigms.
That's very interesting. I love the way you pull that colloquialism to weather current storms, and you're I get it. My goodness, I got chills just talking about that because the one thing that what came to mind just in sitting here now at her feet and hearing that was this: these people that have been here, the people of color, they have been here. They have weathered these storms. This is not their first, to coin a phrase, an American phrase, this is not their first rodeo show. This is not the first time they've had the global, the air has changed, the seas have changed, the mountains have changed, the Pangea, for crying out loud. When their cultures remember back to the
Yes,
time when the earth was one crust of soil, and as it
yes,
began to split apart, their
yes,
books, their historical accounts, they talk about all these things. And if we're not asking them, you've been through it. It's just like, what will we do if I'm younger? If I'm a younger woman, and I'm going through just my daily life, I'm going to ask an older woman, well, what's it like to do this, or what's it like when I get to this age, or how do I do something? That's just the normal course, and
absolutely,
we look at it as though it's something totally new and, oh my God, what are we doing?
exactly.
Well, Rosemary has pinned for us. She has put it. And we're going to go a little bit deeper, but I just want to show you here. I want to put it on the screen, and I will put this up again throughout the conversation. But educational leadership and the global majority, decolonizing narratives, is now published by Palgrave Macmillan.
That's right.
And you can go there and you can get that book. And then you can also, for those of us who are Amazonians, I should say, we like to go out to Amazon. We got that Amazon Prime account, and we're sitting there. I know you got your pens ready, and you're sitting there, ready to press that button. Here it is. Go to Amazon. Author Rosemary Campbell underscore Stephen, Stephen. And so go out there and you can get that book, and it will give you even more granular detail. We're going to get as much as we can in these few moments that we have her here with us. And I'll put that up, as we go throughout the broadcast. But what I'd like to do now is I would like to kind of switch gears, because as we know, this is our 66th convening for the UNCSW, the Commission on the Status of Women. And we're here, our theme this season is on climate change, which is our goal 13. And we're scrambling now because I'm looking at the clock because it's 2022 and 2030. We had a whole list of things we wanted to get done by 2030. Well, guess what? When you made that list back in 2010, that looked like it was going to be easy to do. Now it's 2022 and it's only 8 years left. Okay, so it's not
Absolutely.
20 years left to get these things done. So, can you tell us, or maybe even help some of us, the disaster risk mitigation that can be
Mm,
in place? You're going to be talking to leaders and really helping them framework
mm,
how they do things or what have you. So they're leading in their businesses, their communities, their countries, or what have you. Disaster risk mitigation. The everyday person needs to know. How are you
absolutely.
going to get that? And as an educator, okay, that's excellent, because you guys sit in the seat of giving us instructions, telling us how to do things, where to go. How can it seems like you were designed for this. So how would you do that?
Right. Now, that's a brilliant question to start us off with. And particularly when I think about where we are geographically located. So, where I particularly live is in the rural part of Jamaica. And that's very different to the towns in Jamaica in terms of not just topography, but where we are in relation to sea level. The sea is just across the road from my home. And there are many parts of this island that are below sea level. I know that you're phoning, you're in from the United States, and so you'll know, about places being below sea level. Also, we sit in a
Mm-hmm.
hurricane belt. So there are all kinds of strategies and in place, and people do know what to do, but it's whether it's actually practical for you to do the things that are written down in terms of managing risk in a situation of disaster. So, for example, where we are here, we're in a hurricane belt. We're below sea level in terms of where we are. And, if there were a huge tsunami, it would take a good part of the coastline. So the risk management is that we have some places that you can get to, largely schools, and also buildings are a little bit higher up on higher ground, but you would struggle to drive up there in a risk situation, and many people would be on foot. And the would there be sufficient time for you to get to these places of safety? I would say probably not in a real situation. So in one respect, the routines are there, people know what they need to do, but in others, and being honest about my rural situation, where, for example, Wi-Fi is very, very unreliable. People would rely on listening to things like radio signals would go down, mobile phones, telephones would go down. A lot of people nowadays don't have landlines in their home, but and that's partly because of capacity. That's partly because of the utilities company's capacity to provide landlines. So I haven't got a landline in my home. I would be reliant on a mobile. And the reason I haven't got a landline in my home is that when I went to one of the two providers that I could go to, they said there was no more capacity. And literally, they said, Yvonne, I'd have to wait for somebody to die and give up
Yeah.
their landline before I got a landline. So how would you get a message to me to remind me or my neighbors about where the higher ground is, which building they need to go to, etc. Or even that it looked as if, disastrous weather was coming our way, So systems are in place, but on the ground, the reality of people being able to get to safety, understanding, the level of danger that there is, and being able to move quickly, that's very, very vulnerable because of a lack of infrastructure in terms of, and people having access to affordable and reliable means of communication. So we would very much be reliant on each other. Um, and also going back to Indigenous peoples, it's very interesting. People who've always lived in this area know when storms are coming. And they'll be the
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
cut down any trees that are near your house, or whatever. They're the ones who would be saying that, and those aren't the official lines of communication, but
Right.
it's certainly another form of risk management.
Mm-hmm. And I literally could see here going here almost. I hear another book coming out of you, and that is Indigenous risk mitigation, because the going back to the old signal codes. How did we signal from one house to the next? I grew up in rural Michigan, and it
Abs-
was like that. And they had signal codes with lights, with candles, with different things. I can remember in the storm of '67. That was a big snowstorm, and that kind of swept across the northern part of the United States.
mhm.
And there in Michigan, it was a disaster, and we had to climb up onto. My father had to dig out, and so since I was the youngest, okay,
Wow.
it was easy for me to dig out, and it was fun, as a kid to dig out. But we went on top the rooftop of the house.
Wow.
That's just how the snow had, just because we it was rural, so just snow drifted up, and we're on the
Yeah.
rooftop of the house. And
Wow.
then I had to make a big H,
Yeah.
for house, for
Yeah.
home. So I had to do that and make it wide enough so that they could see it when they came
Yeah.
by with the big herring helicopters, and
Yeah.
slid that big door open. And then he gave the signal for me to move out of the way and to go
Wow.
back down inside, to go back inside,
Yeah.
and put pointed
Yeah.
down. So then I knew I was supposed to do that. So I went back inside. Then they dropped the boxes on the rooftop. And then went back out, and we got the boxes and brought them in.
Yes.
That's just how bad the snow was. But those types of things, not being these were things that Michigan gave out because, and I would imagine, I know they still do, because the snow is very bad there, and that's not,
Yes.
that can be any year, any given time, and now with climate change, it gets only worse. But
Yeah.
like you say, what are areas that particular place, it was rural and it's still rural, but some areas are were rural and are now cities, and they have
That's right.
lost their way.
That's
And
right.
like you said, where you live, yeah, it's, believe it or not, the rural areas. I'm probably not as worried about the rural areas as I am about the cities,
I can
because the
imagine.
rural areas, the people there, they kept a lot of the old ways, and they respect. One of the things I will say, people,
Hmm.
and what we're talking about here, as you see, Rosemary and I are having a conversation. But one of the main key things that you need to take away from what this segment right here, we're talking about, this is simply respect.
Yes.
Respecting the way of the elders and the
Uh,
people who have been here for centuries, millennia, and have listened, so that you can learn what you need to do, and you can follow those things. Like you said, they tell you, cut down the trees.
yes.
Animals, learn
Yeah.
how to read the signals
Yeah.
of the animals.
Abs-
Birds, the
abs-
birds, the dogs, all of the cats, all the different animals,
yeah.
foxes. These
Yeah.
things will tell you, groundhogs, small animals. You'll see their movements. They know how that weather is changing. Frogs, you begin to hear crickets. All of those things. You may think, oh my goodness, where are they going with this? What is this? This has everything to do with climate change.
It has.
Because why? They've been through it. This is not new. This is not new to them at all. This is just the normal course of what this earth goes through. And so therefore, who better to learn from and to be able to capture something from than the people, the fauna, the insects, the life, the trees, all of that have been here and have gone through it. So our
Abs-
next question up that we're going to deal with, and that is, how easy is it for yourself and others in the
abs-
time of climate change disaster? How easy,
mhm,
do you see it, and how much easier do you
mhm.
want it to be? What if it's not easy? What do you want? What can we do for you?
The simple answer to your question, Yvonne, and you brought so much wisdom through these questions and the way you have framed things. It is not easy. Access is not easy. Access is not easy to finance. Access is not easy in terms of us being able to communicate with one another. Wi-Fi is unreliable. All of these kinds of things, and there is a really, really critical thing about finance. Really critical. One of the things that is happening across the Caribbean and certainly on the continent of Africa is a form of debanking. And when we actually dig into what debanking is, I'll give you an example for me. My mother and I have had a bank account here in Jamaica for 30 years with an international bank. So that's the Bank of Nova Scotia. So its home is Canada. Um, a few years ago, the local bank in the little village where I live outside of Lucy, the Nova Scotia Bank, closed. They said that people needed to go online, and that the unspoken, there was no reason given as to why it closed. But the assumption was that they weren't doing enough business. What that means is if you have a Nova Scotia bank account, you have to either travel 1 hour to Montego Bay or 45 to 50 minutes in the other direction to Negril. Both of those are tourist destinations where you can get to a Nova Scotia bank. In Lucy, we have a total cash community. You buy things in the market in cash. You go to the local stores and you buy for things in cash. You pay your school fees in cash. You pay your utilities in cash. And my mother, for example, she lives in the UK, but she's 96 years old. People of those generation are not online bankers. They deal in cash.
Right.
And so in a situation right now, I probably have the equivalent of $30 in my purse. If I have money in my bank account, but if I needed to transfer money or get money, it would literally be a drive, 45 minutes one way or an hour the other way. That's me. I have transportation. I get to a cash point and stand in a very, very long queue to get money out, and there's a limit in terms of how much money obviously you can get out. Other ways of transferring money has become very, very expensive. Western Union, etc. Is now that's shut down in Lucy. There isn't a Western Union in Lucy now, and so there are other places that you have to go. When I talk to people across the Caribbean, they say that there's a similar pattern. And when I talk to colleagues in Africa, they can show me entire swathes of the continent that have gone through a debanking process. And so just looking at access to finance, before we look at access to anything else, in a disaster situation, that's doubled, tripled, quadrupled our risk, because there is no easy way for us to even get hands on our own money in order to do anything that we need to do. So that's one
Wow,
thing.
now that's interesting. That's very interesting because that has also happened here in the United States,
Okay.
where they have gone in communities of color, and the banks, that were there for years, hundreds of years. Your parents banked at those banks, and then you bank at those banks.
Absolutely.
And now all of a sudden the bank is closing, and yet the community, the area, is not getting smaller in population, it's actually increasing in population. So it's not only are you not getting the justification, there is no justification for it. If the area is increasing in the number of people, then it was anything, instead of the bank closing up, it looks like you need to be building more banks or expanding your staff at the bank. and yet you go into areas, other areas, and their areas, they're bringing in more banks that you hadn't even never heard of,
Yeah.
Synovus and all these other new names are coming up. It's like, well, who is this? Who is that? But they're coming up into other areas, but the banks, but nobody is coming into the areas of color. And so that seems to be a globe. That sounds like we got another worldwide pandemic. And these are the types of things that when you look at the topic that this young lady has written on
Mm-hmm.
about decolonizing the narratives, what
Mm-hmm.
that means is she's not talking about just getting rid of the colonial people or what have you, and out
Yeah.
of a system or what have you. What she's talking about is in your mind. This
Absolutely.
is that elephant on the rope. That's what
Absolutely.
this is. That's what she's talking about. She's talking about stop. People of color, you're 85% of this world, not of your community, not of
True.
your country, of the entire world. 85% of the people. Think about that. If you got $1 and I got 85 cents, and then all at 15 cents, I'm really not worried about that 15% that I don't have. I've got 85 cents. I can do
Exactly.
so much with that 85 cent that 15% can't even begin to have
Absolutely.
any impact on me,
Ex-
for me. It's just run around like that little mosquito on the back of an elephant. So you're going to have to get off of that elephant rope mentality. And what that simply says is the elephant on the rope, they put that tire chain on the baby elephant and he can't move it. But by the
Yeah.
time he becomes that adult, he still thinks he can't move it.
Yeah.
Because why? It's been ingrained in his mind. I couldn't move that yesteryear, and now decades later, I still can't move. When all he has to do is step on it, and he break the rope, the spike, and everything in its wake.
True.
These, he can do that. So, and
True.
that's the same thing with people, and that's what the decolonization narrative is. You've got to change this narrative in the minds of the people of color. Not the people
Absolutely.
who are not of color, but the people of color. We're the ones have to change our minds. If we're seeing and we know that the bank is going out, there's
Yeah.
no bank there,
Yes.
contact a black bank. There's several black banks in the United
Precisely.
States. There are several black banks throughout Africa. There are several black banks in India. There are several black banks in China, in New Zealand, in Australia. Black banks. Okay, people of color banks. I'm just gonna say black because blacks,
Yeah.
Asians, Indians, all of you are
Absolutely.
people of color.
Yeah.
So
Because the
fine,
majority.
contact them and put one of them in your community. Tell them, hey, this community here, there's 2,500 people. There's 3,500 people. There's people who come from all over and bank here at this. If we had a bank, we put our money in the bank. Because what does a bank need? A bank. I worked in the banking system. I worked in that system for 20 odd years. I'm in the finance industry. We need depositors. We need people to put money in the bank. We need people to borrow money from the bank. We need people to do business with the bank. So if a bank is going out of your area or out of your way, don't be the bank. Don't let somebody just simply come in and take out your stores. That's the same thing with grocery stores. They're taking the grocery stores out of areas. If we're
Absolutely.
sitting here and I'm listening to this young lady, what she basically is telling there, I'm saying, okay, what are they going to end up with in the town? Nothing. What are you
Precisely.
trying to do? Are you, really, are you trying to just really take out the town? It's almost like you've just taken the oxygen from taking the wood off the fire. Fire's burning
Absolutely.
nice, and now you're taking the wood off the fire, and the fire is not going to keep burning. It's going to go out. Is that the end game?
And,
That's
and and
what people of color got to understand. What's the end game?
what is the end game? And you see, for me, Yvonne, the important thing, and you've nailed it. Number one, we need to remember and that has begun to happen. So as well as adding the the additional knowledge about, look at the black banks overseas, we've started to re-energize credit unions, for example, within our communities. But one of the things that we are not, I think, fully utilizing is our collective financial muscle. Islands like Jamaica earn more from remittances than they do from tourism. More from remittances, more from Jamaicans overseas sending money back to their people. So basically, if we were to collectively organize, as you say, to ensure that at least some of that money is used in terms of developing the facilities, the utilities that we need, giving us options as well, so that there isn't just one place that we go to for electricity. In our country, there's one provider of electricity. If that switch goes, the whole island goes. The whole island
Wow.
goes. In
You
a-
can't
in
you
an
can't do that.
in
We
an
have to
area.
become
Absolutely, we got
we bought
360
the story.
days of
So
sunshine.
yeah,
We should
we
not be
we
around
we got
fire.
to stop drinking that Kool-Aid, because that leads us right to our last question, which is what is the impact of this on your industry and economic growth? And that's what we're talking about here, right now. That impact is great. You have to stop believing. You've got to, just like the prime minister in New Zealand. She went back to the indigenous people there
Yes,
and said, "How did you deal with this? How did your forefathers
yes,
deal with these
yes.
types of things?" Knowing that they had dealt with that, they didn't have
Absolutely.
shots, and they weren't waiting on Moderna and
No,
Pfizer and whoever else decided they wanted to come up with some concoction. They didn't have any of that. What did they use? What did they do? They obviously did something. You still here, so we know we know whatever you did worked. So let's try that. Let's do that. At least, if nothing else, we know 100% it worked. Uh,
absolutely.
what we really are going, one of my good takeaways I have here, and
Mm.
that is to say, people, colored people, we back to that again. Okay. So we back to that again. I know we
Please,
weren't looking forward to the name
yeah.
change, but I like it better. No, we're not gonna do colored people. We're not gonna do colored people. We're gonna do. I like Rosemary's better. I want to be a part of the global majority. I've already started using that term.
Absolutely,
So yes,
absolutely.
I'm part of the global majority. Uh, we have to start going back and remembering, not looking and asking someone else to remember for us or someone else to do it for us. Quit sitting waiting on a handout and hoping that your industry or your business is going to grow. You're going to have to do this, and you're going to have to do it for not for yourself, for your children, and for generations to follow. So, Rosemary, this has been your show. What would you say is the impact of global climate change, on just industries in generals, in helping them to grow economically? How can we grow out of this? We find, I'm a capitalist, I'm a venture capitalist. We find a way to grow out of everything.
Absolutely. I think it has to be um, a new form of globalism, Yvonne. A new form of globalism that isn't the kind of parasitic uh, capitalism that we have, um, where the majority is the one that generates wealth for the minority. And so that's what I mean about a kind of parasitic approach to globalism and capitalism. What we need is something that focuses on majority need rather than minority greed. And there has to be a form of collectivism that actually understands that we are connected to one another. And what impacts me impacts you. Um, it's generational as well and intergenerational, and so that kind of way of seeing and looking out for the interests of we, that we orientation, is actually going to save planet Earth. If we continue to work on minority greed, which is about taking the resources, the land, not looking at how we can rebuild and invest in, for example, our coral reefs around here that have been overfished, the land that's being taken to build hotels instead of us looking at how, or alongside doing building hotels, let's look at how we can support small farming in industries, and farming collectives. I live next door to my sister, and my sister lived next door to my brother, just the three houses along here. If we were vegetarians, Yvonne, we could live off the food that we grow on our little small holdings. But there's nowhere for me when my breadfruit tree bears 40 breadfruit one time. I have to give away because everybody else has breadfruit. If there was somewhere that we had, for example, a cold storage facility where all of us, as little, sort of individual people who grow our own food, could store our food safely, and there it could be distributed through, farmers markets at very, very low cost to people who don't grow food. We wouldn't have to be importing the food that we're importing into our supermarkets. And when there is a problem logistically in terms of moving food from A to B, we would have food within our areas, and we just eat seasonally what we grow. So there's a lot that we could do um, to so that climate change has a positive impact on the global majority if we refocused our thinking about who benefits and who doesn't, and what it is that we need to invest in. And so there's so much investment in terms of tourism, at the expense of looking at the communities that service these tourist industries, but also a lot of us are not working within tourism. So what is it that we need to do to invest in those communities to make sure that the benefits, if you like, of tourism is something that we feel. So there's a lot that we need to discuss further about what form of economic growth. And the third book, because you've inspired me for the second one, but the third book is around a new kind of globalism, a new kind of globalism that centers the majority and decenters the minority, and moves away from what I call parasitic forms of capitalism, where those that succeed within times of stress um, are at the expense of the majority. I don't think that that is a sustainable way going forward, morally, ethically, or even economically.
I love that, and I love that third book, that total. And I have something to add that I want you to make sure you put in there, and that is the imagery, the picture and the imagery of the elephant with that little bird that's always on his back, and that little bird, it was never designed. His design, his whole life, his whole being was never designed to take over the elephant, but everything he does with all thought is how I can care for the elephant. And he is very respectful and mindful of that. And because he cares for that
Mhm.
elephant, his species will always remain, as will the elephant species will always remain. And that's my contribution to you.
Thank
So
you.
we've been talking and and I am so thankful to have with us Rosemary Campbell Stevens, MBE. Let me put that up again so that those I was remiss.
Mhm,
MBE, she is a member of the British Empire.
mhm, mhm.
So she has earned everything and has been recognized by the Queen of England. And for that, I just wanted to say congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we
Thank
appreciate all that you have offered to England and all that you have to offer to the world. It is a perspective that is needed and it is an implementable perspective. And what I would like for all of our listeners and readers to do is to get the book, to read it. Begin to have in your book clubs, in your conversations, at your table, at your dinner tables, in your gatherings, online, offline. Educational Leadership in the Global Majority. Decolonizing Narratives is now published on Palgrave Macmillan, and you can get that book just as easily with the click of a finger on Amazon.com. And our author is Rosemary Campbell Stevens, and Stevens Stephen. And you want to get that for yourself so that you begin to understand the world that you're actually living in and not the world that you think you're living in.
you. That's a beautiful way to put it. That's such a beautiful way to put it, Yvonne. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being a guest on United Nations CSW 66. We look forward to 2022 and all that it will bring. And we also look forward to having Rosemary back here in 2023 to speak with us about the successes that she has gained, as we know that she will gain many successes this year. And we wanted to offer our services to her from San Pete Financial Group and also from Women Leading Change Now and from Lifesavers Ambassadors International USA. We are here to help you, to assist you in any way that we can.
It's been a
Thank you.
real honor. Thank you so much, Yvonne Gamble. It has been an honor. Thank you.
Any last words you want to say? You are quite welcome, Rosemary. Are there any things that you want to leave our audience with?
Yes, yes, I would. Um, the book is a hopeful book. There's also a tiny little video, 1 minute and 40-second video on the global majority. And it's on my YouTube channel. If you just went to Rosemary Campbell Stevens on YouTube and check Global Majority, it encapsulates for me the aspiration that I have, Yvonne, that all peoples on planet Earth will understand that we are connected to one another. We always have been. And that what the global majority concept is a way of bringing us together as human beings at this time because our planet requires it of us. So the book's very hopeful, and the little video is very, very hopeful. So I'd like people to go on there and find it. Rosemary Campbell Stevens on YouTube, and look out for the global majority. And please subscribe to my channel while you're there.